My name is Yongchun Jang, born on October 29th, 1950. My family lived in a small hut. At the age of 30, my grandmother became widowed with 4 children, 1 daughter and 3 sons. 2 of them were killed during the Yosun incident. Her eldest son was traumatized by the incident, almost getting mentally ill. He lived long, but his condition never improved till he died. My family was native here, never moving out, and just farming. Our village had about 40 households, all of them very poor. People lived in small clay houses, so run down that snakes even came into the rooms. Our village was located near Yangjimyeotgol, right behind Woljun Middle School. I've just been to the 2 places. In one spot 70 people were killed, and in the other over 40 people lost their lives. My younger uncle, desperate for food, worked as an errand boy at a local primary school. Around 5 p.m., as he was leaving, he was apprehended by the police at the school gate, detained at the station, and by the next day, he was dead. At Woljun Middle School, a large pit was dug, where 45 people were killed in a single incident. Those who weren't shot were simply buried alive in the pit. My youngest uncle heard of his older brother's death. He lived over in Sangam, and in those days, children had to cross over from there to attend the national primary school here, with no other way to get messages. He heard from a student attending that school that his brother had died. While crossing over, he was captured and shot dead on the spot. They covered his body with a straw sack, carried it on an A-frame carrier, and held a funeral. He had committed no crime, but there was no trial or something back then. The very next day he was dragged away, held at the station all day, and the following day killed without any reason. There was no trial back then, none at all. They brought in soldiers from the 12th Regiment to suppress the 14th Regiment, rounding up young men from each village. Unfortunately, my younger uncle, who was close to the police station, was caught while leaving the nearby school. He was detained for 1 night at the station, and the next morning, led away along with dozens of other young men, forced to stand still, shot and buried. They even covered them with soil, afraid that there might have been some who were still alive. All day long, my father had to dig them up, carry them back home on A-frame carriers. He heard the news that they had been killed in just 1 day. You can't imagine the heartbreak he must have felt, carrying them back home, then losing another brother in a similar way, also bringing him home on an A-frame. Back then, out of fear, no one could even hire help for the task. It was so devastating that it eventually drove him to a breaking point. When I was very young, I remember him singing to himself, restless, sometimes jolting awake at night. In the end, consumed by anger and sadness, he passed away not long after. It was a horrifically painful thing. My grandmother cried every day, struggling to survive enduring hardship, as she saw her 2 daughters-in-law weeping all the time. My mother, as the eldest daughter-in-law, also had to bear this heavy burden, witnessing the family's pain for years. Back in those days, you couldn't avoid hearing the sound of women beating their chests and crying, sitting huddled in the kitchen or in the village gristmill. We lived through that for decades in such tragic surroundings. Despite the hardship, my aunts did not remarry and remained devoted to the family, because it was difficult for someone to remarry even if they wanted to. So they simply continued living as they were and passed away. They truly suffered greatly from witnessing and experiencing all of that. You can imagine how hard it must have been. The most unfair point, going through those things. At that time, once a red line, one criminal record, was marked on your family register, the Police Intelligence Division would continually bother you, There were some people even in the village assigned to monitor us. When I think about it, it's truly heartbreaking. They kept monitoring us, even though my family members had died so unjustly. You can't imagine how terrifying the guilt by association system is. Violence is nothing in comparison. The man who had been assigned to watch us visited our house when he got retired, apologizing for what he had done. He had been assigned to watch us for a long time, so he must have felt deeply affected to the point of apologizing at his retirement. He said to me, "I know you didn't do anything wrong. It's not because you were guilty that I had watched you. We just live in an era when anyone could be incriminated, even though they were innocent." I was truly grateful for those words. People always avoided talking to our family, calling us a communist household and constantly shunning us. When we went outside, they would point fingers, saying we were a bad family. Even marriage was difficult. Whenever we tried, people would say we were a communist family. And so we faced hardships. I did odd jobs like shining shoes and selling newspapers, and weekly magazines when they came to be published. I also worked as a supervisor for BBS, a center for juvenile delinquents. I couldn't go far, always bound like a tethered calf, just going back and forth, working. The guilt by association system should never exist again. We know the Yosun incident originated from the Jeju April 3rd incident. What I want to say is people involved in those two incidents need to join forces to help set history right. Hearing that history has been distorted causes me deep heartache. We need to learn about the Yosun incident to set the record straight. Unless history is set right, side effects will keep recurring. If we can clearly distinguish right from wrong, we can prevent future tragedies. There are still so many heartbreaking events because of what is left unaddressed. Most people who experienced this are now nearing 80 years old, and many of them passed away just last year to our despair. People are discouraged and don't even want to speak up anymore because they feel it won't make any difference. It's deeply frustrating. We need collective efforts to bring awareness to this tragedy. In short, these people didn't even know how to write their own names, not even their own names. How absurd and ridiculous. They didn't know anything about ideology, even unable to read and write. People who were just at home, eating meals, and were killed without reason. What crime could they possibly have committed to be treated this way even now? We're simply asking the government for proper acknowledgement, yet even that isn't given. Even with the passing of the special law, the pain remains, and it's truly beyond words. Even now, there are people who call the Yosun incident a rebellion. It's truly absurd. These days, young people often visit the office on tours, and they ask, "Is it true so many people really died like this?" That's why education is so important. At the very least, there should be proper education on this, but it's not happening. I feel sorry about that. The most important thing is that the Yosun incident, even from a historical perspective, is one of the vilest events. It was a tragedy where far too many people were killed, yet this incident has remained buried until now. Our country has achieved economic growth and ranked among the highest in the world in education standards. Yet, this incident remains covered up and unresolved. It must be addressed as soon as possible, or the Yosun incident should be included in our textbooks. If only the Yosun incident had been known earlier, the Gwangju uprising might not have happened. They are all interconnected. Although they may seem unrelated, they are deeply linked. For this reason, it's urgent that the Yosun incident be properly recognized so that nothing like this will ever happen again. This is what the citizens must awaken to. It may seem like we're living well now due to the progress of democracy, but within our lives lies the difficult and tragic history of the Yosun incident. This is something that everyone, especially our citizens, should know about through education, so that such tragedies will never happen again. I hope young people will also take an interest in this history.